Hey everyone, how are you doing? I hope you are doing great. My name is Mike Perez. I am serving as director of Rain Alabama. With me today is Laura Cooley, who works for the Water Resources Center here at Auburn University. And Laura has put together an awesome presentation on rain ready practices for homeowners. And the goal of today's presentation is to give you all an idea of what we have, what options you might have available to consider for your homes, and just to give you a starting point on things to think through as you're considering implementing low impact development or green infrastructure practices. Um, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A after the presentation. So if you've got questions about anything that Laura covers, or if you've got questions about the program in general, we'll be happy to address those. And the way you can submit a question is if you scroll to the bottom of your screen, there's an opportunity for Q&A, and you can type in your question at any point. It'll come to us, and we can see the questions as they come in, and we'll just go in order and address those towards the end of the presentation. Uh, you all don't have the opportunity to speak up, but just please type in your questions, and we'll get to them. So with that, I'll hand it over to Laura and let her run with the presentation.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike, and hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining. I'm glad we're all here to talk today about rain ready practices for homeowners. Like Mike said, I'm just going to give you a kind of overview of some of the more common practices that you might want to consider. This is definitely not all extensive, however. All right. Okay, so I'm sure you already visited the rainready website, but just as a reminder, this is a statewide program from AU Engineering. The goal is to help help property owners like you, communities and schools implement those practical stormwater solutions, reducing runoff, improving water quality, and enhancing our watersheds. So today, what we're going to cover is what is a rain-ready landscape? What can that look like? How do you go about, looking at a site, making a plan? What are ways that you can, do that, reduce impervious surfaces, think about intercepting stormwater, rerouting it other locations in your landscape, and using vegetation as part of that, a piece in the puzzle. And then how do you put it all together and think about everything as a system? So, like Mike said, we have a lot of information we're going to get through, so I'm probably going to speak a little quickly. Just if you have questions that pop up, please feel free to put them in the chat and just file them away for later, and we'll definitely try to come back to everything. Okay, so why are we interested in rain-ready landscapes? So I think about this as a way to design your landscape to manage stormwater in a way that both protects your property from stormwater damage, but also reduces stormwater runoff and improves water quality. So just to give you kind of an understanding, we're going to step back for a second and just talk briefly about why stormwater is important and how it all fits into, what we're trying to do here. So just, a quick diagram here. A lot of us live in urban areas now. As we've, developed those areas with more roads, sidewalks, roofs, etc., we have a lot more what we call impervious surfaces, which means that less of our rainwater is able to infiltrate back into the ground. So we have a lot more runoff, stormwater runoff running across our surfaces and ultimately into our local waterways. And that can be a problem sometimes because it can, as that stormwater moves across a landscape, it can pick up pollutants like oil and gas, metals, fertilizers, pesticides, bacteria, and sediment, and it kind of all wash it usually into your local waterways, which can, cause a lot of water to arrive very quickly in local streams and can contribute to erosion and additional sediment. So, to summarize, when we live in urban areas, we tend to see more runoff, less infiltration, more flooding, and less base flow or less water available in our streams because less of it's being reabsorbed. So tying it back to the program, that kind of gives you a big picture of some of the things this program is trying to do, reduce runoff, improve water quality, but also enhance that watershed health. So not only can you manage stormwater, but you can feel good about what you're doing. Okay, so we're going to kind of work through these kind of 6 topics. So rain-ready landscapes, we're going to talk about coming up with a plan to slow the volume of water that's leaving your landscape, thinking about how we can use it more efficiently. We're going to want to think about how do we spread out that water, let it sink into the landscape, and are there areas where we need to reroute it to, stormwater practices or vegetated beds, things like that. Hopefully, we'll also talk a little bit about developing healthy soils and plants. That's kind of often an overlooked part of managing stormwater, but if you have compacted soils or unhealthy soils, that can also contribute to additional runoff. So we'll talk about plants and then a little bit about maintenance as well. Always something to consider. Okay. Ultimately, hopefully by the end of this, you'll think about landscapes as systems through which water moves and not just think about, one problem that you need to fix with one particular type of practice. We really want to think about water as systems and think about these different tools that we could have to implement or, address this system, our system in our home landscape. Okay. Just some quick terms. You might have heard the term green infrastructure. This is kind of a broader term to think about nature-based approaches to managing stormwater. It usually utilizes plants, soils, and natural processes that can range from small practices to larger, vegetated areas, even, wetlands, forests, things like that. And then low impact development, I kind of think of that as a subset of green infrastructure, but we often refer to this as LID. This is, a kind of development approach to managing stormwater and trying to keep the stormwater on site or as close to a source as possible trying to mimic natural hydrology, but we want to increase filtration and hopefully kind of manage that stormwater closer to where it falls. And we'll talk through a bunch of different practices that we consider low impact development. This just quickly, just like a little overview of some of the practices we're going to dive into. In this presentation, again, there's many ways to do this, but this is just, some of the more popular ones with homeowners. So thinking about rerouting stormwater, there's a variety of ways to do this, pipes, French drains, dry stream beds. Rain gardens are another kind of tool in our toolkit to intercept and hold some of that storm water and use native plants as part of that system. Rain barrels and cisterns, another way to kind of intercept, hold, and then slowly release into the landscape. Permeable pavers. Again, we talked about those all the runoff that happens in our urban areas. So, thinking about ways that we can allow that water to infiltrate where it falls. So permeable pavement is part of that. Trees, vegetation, and hopefully we'll talk a little about streamside planting too. It may not apply to everybody here today, but a lot of our urban streams, especially, we see a lot of erosion. And so we want to think about ways to stabilize those stream banks and improve habitat and water quality. Okay, so like I said, I'm going a little fast today, but we will answer some questions later on. Okay, so one of the things I suggest people do when they're, just getting started is think about understanding your site. It's hard to know what practices you need to put in place or what's going to address all the issues you're having if you don't necessarily understand what's going on in your site. So, first, one of the first things is to kind of come up with a plan. And to do that, you need to observe your site as it's raining or in a storm event. So you want to think about things like, what is the topography of the site? What are the drainage patterns that I'm seeing occurring? Where are my downspouts? Where is that water, already being rerouted on my property? What driveways might be contributing to that? Are there areas of ponding? Things like that. So this involves really looking at your home site as a system and thinking about where the water is already being rerouted, where it's flowing, and kind of getting a little bit of a map. And this doesn't have to be a complicated map. You can just have, a piece of paper, a little sketch, whatever it might be. You can even go on Google Earth and kind of get an overview of your property and just help start kind of mapping out what's already going on where you are. And I already mentioned this, I think, but also include in that those impervious surfaces that are contributing to the runoff, where they are, and if they might be part of a change in the system that you want to see. So your map might include things like, where is the water flowing now? What changes do you want to make? Kind of what are your goals? What are your problem areas? What's your vision? And then this will help you start to think about, or at least communicate if you're working with a contractor, some of the, the practices that might be best for your site. And I just included this picture on the right just to show you, this is a sketch of how someone is rerouting stormwater coming off of their roof, going into a gutter downspout, and then they're rerouting it to their garden bed. So, but it doesn't have to be, you know, too technical. All right, so moving on to another piece of the puzzle is thinking about reducing impervious surfaces. And again, we want to, think of ways to slow down that water, let it spread out, let it infiltrate, and let it sink back in. So removing impervious surfaces is a part of that. And I mean, these permeable surfaces can be a variety of things. You can have permeable pavers, something like this, but they are all designed to let that water soak in and not run off. So it might be something as simple as kind of a gravel pathway. It might be stepping stones. There's a lot of different ways that this could be incorporated into your landscape instead of necessarily just your typical sidewalk or something like that. So this can be an aesthetic way to manage stormwater, but keep in mind it does require maintenance. So it's not necessarily a one and done, but it can be part of the overall overarching LID system. This is just, another example of permeable pavement. It looks really nice. It can still serve a lot of the functions it needs to serve, but it does allow that stormwater to infiltrate. This is a kind of creative example I just wanted to throw in. Maybe it involves just using less pavement in your home landscape or in a more creative way. These people obviously really like growing plants and vegetation, but this is kind of a clever way to, think about reducing those impervious surfaces. Okay, so intercepting, holding, and slowing stormwater. That's one of the things we want to focus on. So we talked a little bit about downspouts. So most of our homes have gutter systems. They may not. If yours does, you might want to just become aware of where those downspouts going. Sometimes they might be connected to a stormwater system. That's not often the case here in Alabama, it seems to me, but yours might be connected to a stormwater system. If it is, you can disconnect it, but you can also just think about where you might want to reroute that water, whether that's moving it farther away from your foundation into a garden, a raised bed, something like that. You could also consider rerouting it into something like a rain barrel or a cistern. The goal of these rain barrels and cisterns, in short, is to kind of capture and hold a lot of that runoff and let you decide when it's used and where you want to reroute it into your landscape. So this is just an example of that. So rain barrels, really can run the gamut in terms of simple to complicated. I mean, again, their goal is to kind of capture, hold, and slowly release that water. It can be as simple as kind of a setup like you see here on the right where the downspouts directly going into it. Or if you need to treat a larger amount of volume, depending upon how much of your roof is kind of being captured and rerouted into a rain barrel or a cistern, you can opt for something larger, but just note both when you're setting these up, you really want to consider how much water volume you're going to be capturing because it's really easy to overflow these systems. And there are going to be some presentations on rain barrels later on as part of this Rain Ready Alabama program. And there's an extension booklet on this as well. So you can really dive into the details. But there's lots of ways you can incorporate this into your landscape. You can kind of make it blend in, or you can, make it stand out. You can also daisy chain rain barrels together if you don't want to do a cistern, but you want to have some overflow. So there's lots of different options for what this can look like. And here's a daisy chain system as well. Okay, so rain barrels often are used in conjunction sometimes with rain gardens, but rain gardens are just kind of vegetated shallow depressions in a landscape that are designed to temporarily hold stormwater runoff and let it sink back into the ground. Ideally, these would drain within a day. So I hope, there shouldn't be mosquito pits or anything like that. They are simply allowing you to kind of capture, hold, infiltrate stormwater, and they utilize plants, often native plants, to help with that process. So it can have an aesthetic benefit, it can have an ecological benefit, and those plants also help treat potentially some of the pollutants from stormwater runoff. Here are just some of the basic structures of a rain garden. So they are designed again to kind of capture stormwater. So hopefully you put them in a part of your landscape where stormwater is being routed into them. And then, you kind of have that designed shallow depression. You have native plants, hopefully with their deep roots. And then that water is slowly kind of infiltrating. But there is a kind of overflow berm designed into rain gardens so that if you have a large rain event, you've thought about where it's going to overflow within your property. So I'll just say we're going to do more deep dives on rain gardens as part of this program. So you can tune into another event where we talk about how to design your rain garden, how to think about the size, where in your landscape to put it, and how to, make sure it's meeting your stormwater needs. But we have an extension handbook that also dives deeply into this if you want to get into the details. So again, they're designed to capture runoff. Size, you want to think about the size and shape, really depending upon the amount of water volume you're trying to capture and treat, and your landscape design. And the cool thing about rain gardens is you can do this yourself, but as someone who's attempted to do it myself, it's a lot of work. So just make sure you plan carefully and, think about how the plants are going to fit into your overarching design. I just wanted to show you this quick example. This is a rain garden outside of an architecture firm. They've kind of taken out their lawn and they're rerouting water from their downspout that goes kind of down this little gravel bed into their rain garden. They've planted it with native plants, and here it is functioning. Those plants are still not fully developed, so within 5 years or so that will really take off. But it's kind of showing how it can fit into a really nice aesthetic in an urban area. Okay. Okay, so now moving on to we just talked about kind of holding, storing, capturing, letting water infiltrate. Let's talk about how we can reroute water in landscapes. So one of the ways that people might choose to do this is dry stream beds. This is just really a landscape feature that is designed to kind of mimic what you might see out in natural, stone-lined stream bed. And it looks nice, but it's also a tool to redirect water in your landscape. And this might be moving it away from your foundation or just into a rain garden or, a preferred bed, whatever your choice. Just something to note, this still requires maintenance, but it can be a really, natural aesthetic way to address some of that flow in your landscape. Here's just a couple examples. When done well, I think it can be a really nice asset, but also a really functional asset. These are some pictures I took here at Auburn University in our Arboretum. In this left picture, it's hard to see, but at the top, there's a pipe that's kind of rerouting stormwater under a walking path and then rerouting it into this kind of dry stream bed design that moves stormwater throughout the landscape. So that's not, of course, the only way. There's lots of different ways you can do this. Just thinking about how you can catch and convey. In this picture, they, went through their paved driveway, but still were able to kind of reroute that water into a garden bed. Just kind of, zooming out and thinking bigger picture, we were talking about the home landscape, but, there's lots of ways that these practices are used small and large and, kind of having similar functions. So here you can see this is stormwater runoff from a parking lot being kind of rerouted into a bioswale. So bioswales, we may not see these as often in home landscapes, but I think they can be really useful. These are, landscape vegetated channels that are designed to kind of capture, slow the stormwater, filter it, but also to move it throughout a landscape. And this picture is also here on campus. This is our Mel bioswale. These are just a couple other examples that you might see out in more in kind of larger areas, parking lots. But when designed well, these can manage stormwater, but also just look really aesthetic and provide a lot of shade and other ecosystem benefits. So just something to think about, how you could integrate that. And if done well, they don't even necessarily register as stormwater practices. I just want to quickly mention French drains. I think one of the issues that homeowners tend to struggle with most is having water pool around their foundation. And this is the common practice to, kind of quickly remove some of that water from the foundation. So French drains, this is a gravel-filled trench containing a perforated pipe so that water can easily kind of seep into the pipe and be rerouted into another part of your landscape. Um, just to note, and Mike can talk more about this later, this is not necessarily part of a LID design, but it can be used in tandem to reroute stormwater away into, let's say, a bioswale or a rain garden or something like that. So just something to note, but this is also a tool that you can use. Okay, trying to keep an eye on time, but let's quickly talk about vegetation. This can be an often overlooked key feature of stormwater practices, but it's a really important one. So going back to our basics here, we talked about our overarching plan, slowing, rerouting water, letting it spread out, sink in, and soils and plants can play a big role in that. So I always encourage the use of native plants. So native plants are just plants that are adapted to, in our case, Alabama. They've grown here. They're adapted to our climate. They're adapted to the insects and pollinators of our area. So using native plants can help promote native wildlife, but they're also typically just better adapted to the climate. They often need less maintenance, less fertilizer, and they tend to be better adapted to dealing with drought conditions. So we can talk more about that. We have lots of resources on how to find native plants for different practices, but we highly encourage you to think about that. And of course, opt to not get invasive plants, which are often things like English ivy, kudzu is an obvious one, tallow tree, nandina, things like that, that are not adapted to our local environment, can really take over and don't provide as much back to native wildlife. So just a little tidbit on that. Sorry, this is a little blurry picture here, but just going back to that rain garden that we looked at earlier, these are native plants, and you can see how they've used them in a way that they've kind of clumped them together, organized them so that they look really intentional, but they're still, providing those benefits of uptaking some of the pollutants, providing those deep roots, but it also can look intentional and well kept. I like to think of this as cues of care. Some of the concerns that people have often with stormwater practices and using plants is what the maintenance is going to be and how it's going to look. And you have a lot of control over that, depending upon how you choose the planting design and how you choose to create cues of care. So simple things just like a border or really thinking about how you want to organize your plants can go a long way. So again, we can talk more about specific plants for specific practices, but I just want to introduce that concept. Okay, let's talk quickly about stream banks. And so stream bank stabilization is also a part of the Rain Ready program. So I'm sure many of you, especially in urban areas, have seen what I call sad urban streams, where they're suffering from erosion, again, from a lot of that high water volume being rerouted into urban waterways quickly. That can often lead to excess sedimentation and eroding stream banks. So what can we do about that? There's a couple different things. I'll just draw your attention here on the left picture on the left. You can see one of the reasons that this happens is that there's often not a kind of streamside planting zone. People often just have grass and then mow up to the edge, and then there are no deep roots or shrubs or tree roots to kind of keep some of those stream banks in place. So without those plants, it's a lot easier for those stream banks to erode when you have high velocity flows. It's also easy for the water to become overheated, and which is not great for aquatic organisms. And pollutants that we talked about run off across a landscape. It's also more of a direct path to the waterway when there's no plant buffer. So, thinking about these, what we call riparian systems or, streamside plants, just restoring these and thinking about how we can restore our kind of natural floodplain is something that we want to think about when we're trying to address stream bank stabilization. So plants can help filter and trap nutrients and sediment. Those, we talked about those root systems being really important for holding stream banks in place. So just a quick little diagram here about the importance of roots. We often don't see those. Obviously, we just kind of see what's above ground, but compared to popular, turf grasses, a lot of our native plants or our native prairie grasses really have deep roots, which can be so important for helping keep, treating pollutants, but also keeping soils in place. Just quickly, we like to think about a couple different zones, streamside zones. So zone 1, ideally, it's at that innermost zone right next to the water. You wouldn't want to be mowing up to the edge of that. Ideally, this is where we leave some woody wetland plants and really help kind of restore that streamside edge. Zone 2 is a little wider middle zone, mostly slow growing woody vegetation, but this also helps filter pollutants, so it's a really important kind of zone. And then zone 3, often optional, that's hopefully where you could be growing grasses or other herbaceous species, but it helps kind of diffuse the flow of water across the landscape. So just want to introduce some of those basic concepts if you're thinking about addressing stream issues. And again, these are some native plants that are really well adapted to streamside riparian zones, and they can be beautiful. So, and then I'll just make a quick plug. There's ways that you can, even if you have a stream bank that is eroding and it looks, pretty difficult to deal with, like you can see in this picture, this is pretty eroded, it'd be hard to kind of lay back those banks. But you can consider something called live staking. So in a dormant zone in Alabama, typically from like November to February, you can go out and cut kind of pieces of particular species and simply insert them into stream banks, especially as long as there's a kind of water accessibility within their root zone. So it's a pretty easy way to go out and propagate plants and to put them into eroded stream banks. And then, in the springtime, they will sprout roots and start to kind of repopulate that area with a riparian plant zone. So it's often used in stream restoration projects and things like that. If you're interested in this, we can talk more later, but there's a lot of species that you can use. These are a couple that we use often: silky dogwood, silky willow, elderberry, but there's lots of different options there. And that's an easy, low-cost solution. Okay, so try to be fast here, putting it all together. So we talked about a lot of different kind of tools in your toolbox when thinking about your home landscape as a system for managing water. So hopefully after this presentation, you'll go back to your site, you'll think about your overarching design plan and different ways these tools could work as a system, or what we might call a treatment train, where you might have a rain barrel or a cistern that's capturing water runoff from your roof, and then maybe you're rerouting that to a rain garden, something like that. This is highly variable depending upon your site, but there's lots of different options to pull from. I'll just quickly, before I kick this back over to Mike, say in relation to what we just talked about, Rain Alabama has low impact development and green infrastructure programs, stream bank stabilization, and rain barrels. So there's lots of different ways to connect these ideas into your home landscape. All right, with that, I'll just open it up for questions and discussion.
Laura, that was awesome. Thank you so much for putting this together for us and for hosting this
Sure.
webinar. As a reminder, you can type in questions down at the bottom on the Q&A tab, and we've got a couple that have already come in. So the first question is from Michelle, and she's asking, are there experts who might be able to come help with site assessment, or would that be the contractor? That's a great question. We are doing some site assessments where we're able to, especially here in the local Auburn area. We're also having folks email us photos and videos, and we're able to give you some ideas based on that. But feel free to reach out, send us an email, let us know what you have going on, send us pictures and videos, especially if you have videos or pictures during a rain event. That could be really helpful for us, and we can shoot over some ideas. Um, but yes, we're available and willing to help you out with that. Our partner contractors have also been trained up on this program, and they're available to provide some expertise as well. But it'd be great to give you all some ideas before you meet with the contractor so that you know a little bit about what you might have in mind. Um, Second question from Steve. Can you speak to the pros and cons of rock channels versus a French drain for water runoff? Great question. French drains are very popular because they can hide that flow underground. Um, Pros and cons. So yeah, that is a pro. You don't see the French drain. It's out of mind, out of sight. Um, Cons would be if you have higher flows, like if you've got a bunch of water coming through your yard, you may not be able to put it all through that French drain. So you might prefer to keep it on the surface, putting it in a rock line channel or like a drive, like a riverbed type of scenario. Maintenance is also something to consider with the French drain. You might have roots that grow in, you could have clogging issues. So that's a consideration with your rock line channel that'll have its own maintenance issues. Like you might have to be pulling weeds out of it or maintaining it. Rocks might get moved around a little bit, but yeah, anything to add to that, Laura?
I think that's a good summary. Yeah, with the kind of dry stream beds, I mean, some of that and is an aesthetic choice. You can add plants into the mix there, which would be a little more difficult, I think, with a French drain. But as Mike mentioned, there's different kinds of maintenance concerns with the two different practices. So I would say part of that kind of depends upon the aesthetic that you want, the cost range you're looking at, and the maintenance that you're interested in.
Will is asking, after a heavy rain event, what is a reasonable amount of time for an area of your yard to be soggy? I'll let you handle that one, Laura.
Reasonable amount. That's funny. Well, we know it often stays a lot longer than we'd prefer it to. I will say with the rain gardens, when you are, and we dive into this a little more when we talk about how to design a rain garden, but when you do a rain garden, you do a soil test, a perk test, because you want to make sure that where you're installing your rain garden is not, the spot in your yard where it's always soggy. Ideally, it would seep, you want it to infiltrate within 24 hours before you have mosquito problems. That's not to say that if you have a really soggy part of your yard that's not draining faster, there are still things you can do. I mean, especially using vegetation and things like that, but you wouldn't necessarily want to put a rain garden there that's designed to capture and hold more water. So, yeah, reasonable amount of time. It varies, but ideally you'd like it to drain within 24 hours.
Yeah, and I'll add that anywhere around your home, close to your foundation, you want that draining a little bit faster. You don't want water sitting there for an extended period of time as that could cause issues under your foundation. So just, grading soil away from the house helps with that. If you're gonna have standing water, have it be out in the yard, not near your driveway or not near your foundation. Katie has a comment. Nemo Hilly Natives in Auburn, it's a local nursery. They offer consultations and they sell native plants. She's not associated with them, but wanted to put that plug in, and I agree with that. We've used them in the past. They're great at answering questions about where to plant certain grasses and flowers that are native. And that can get, there's an art to that, especially when you're thinking about shade and aspect that your yard is facing north versus south. There's a lot of considerations to put into play there, and they're great for that.
Absolutely. I'll just second that and say, yeah, we've worked with them a lot on practices that we've we've done. So yeah, I'm glad you brought them up. It's nice to have a native plant nursery in your backyard. At least here
That's
in Lee County. Sorry, guys.
uh, Nemophily. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Or
Is that right?
Nemophily? Nemophily, I think
Yeah.
is how I've heard it, but I don't know.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. There's another one. From Margaret, do you have a suggestion for a slope that tends to erode but is used for moving equipment?
Hmm.
I'm not quite sure what the question is there. Might have to clarify, Margaret, if you want to kind of rephrase that for us.
Yeah, it might be hard to kind of assess
Oh,
that without seeing a picture, but
maybe mowing. Is that what's meant? I bet you meant mowing. Um,
oh,
okay, a slope that's eroding, but you want to mow it. Okay, that's a common issue. If you're too steep and the lawnmower is driving around up and down that slope, those tires tend to slip on that slope, and that's can cause some erosion. Um, Suggestions for that.
I mean, depending upon the site, you could think about terracing. You could, depending upon how you terrace, that's kind of a bigger landscape project, but you could potentially still mow that, or you could plant it with a lot of plants that you just don't have to maintain as much. So terracing could be one potential thing. I would think too, you could consider a planting design that it still allows you to mow a little bit, but maybe allow more vegetation on those slopes. Even things like we mentioned native grasses, things like switchgrass, things like that can be really helpful for preventing erosion as long as you're open to kind of changing the way you manage that landscape. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm following that. Covering any eroded areas is going to help, but the erosion will get worse and worse as water keeps running over it. So if there's a bare spot, putting some sod down or planting it, just getting that soil covered up is going to go a long way. All right. I haven't seen any more questions come in, but thank you for submitting them. If you've got more, reach out to us. Rainready.auburn.edu is our email address. And if you need help with trying to figure out where to start or how to lay out some practices, we're more than happy to help you out with that. So just reach out. Laura, thank you again. This has been awesome. We've recorded this. We're going to post it on the website. If you want to come back and refer to it, it'll be there for you to use as a tool. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, Laura, again, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
All right, thank you all.